Mike Morrison never set out to become a builder. In his 20s, he started working with his father, a mechanic, but life took him in another direction. What began as a summer job on a construction site turned into a career lasting decades, shaping homes and communities. Over time, he built a solid reputation for his skills and strong work ethic. Mike worked at Curtis Construction, a company known for quality and attention to detail. His years of framing houses and managing crews earned him respect, though he never bragged. He let his work speak for itself. His quiet confidence gained him friends and a few rivals in the local construction scene. As Mike drove down Wesley Avenue, he looked at the homes, noting that he had framed 8 of the 11 houses on the block. The other 3 were built by a local contractor, John Piercy. While there was a known rivalry between Piercy Construction and Curtis Construction, it was friendly. Once, when John ran out of concrete mid-job, Curtis sent a crew to help him finish. Mike noticed John Piercy's Mercedes SUV parked outside his house. Recognizing the custom license plate Piercy won, confused, he parked and entered the house, calling for his wife, Rhonda. She directed him to the living room where he found Rhonda and John sitting uncomfortably close on the couch. Mike's kids, Michelle and Mickey, looked excited, oblivious to the tension. "What's going on?" Mike asked, uneasy. Rhonda stammered, avoiding eye contact, while the kids eagerly mentioned John's pool and boat. Mike cut John off when he tried to speak, his anger rising. Rhonda snapped at Mike, accusing him of making the situation harder, but Mike wasn't having it. He confronted John, who attempted to stand, but Mike shoved him back, warning him to stay quiet. The argument escalated, with Mike slapping John, almost enjoying his stunned expression. But the reality hit. His family was slipping away, with his kids lured by material things like a pool and boat trips. After Rhonda, the kids, and a fuming John left, Mike sat alone drinking a beer and reading Rhonda's divorce papers. She was asking for custody of the kids and $400 per month in child support. The microwave dinner sat heavy in his stomach, and though he'd planned to have several beers, he stopped after a couple. There was no point in getting drunk. He had work in the morning, wife or no wife, kids or no kids. He had a job to do. Mike thought back to when he first met Rhonda, a shy 18-year-old in an auto parts store, struggling to find the right battery for her Nissan. "Right here," Mike said quietly. "My car's not on there." Rhonda snapped, glaring at the chart, and Tweedledum over there won't even get off his lazy bum to help. "What kind of car you got?" Mike asked, staying calm after finding the battery she needed. He even offered to install it for her. The cashier Tweedledum glared as he rang up the sale. "Where's the car?" Mike asked, carrying the heavy battery out of the store. 17th and Jackson, Rhonda said bitterly. "Had to walk here." Mike drove his truck to her apartment complex and installed the battery. Her father, Bud, came out and chatted with Mike, discovering he worked for Curtis Construction and liked Coors beer. "If you're going to date my daughter, better start saving," Bud joked. "She loves shiny things." "Dad," Rhonda huffed, embarrassed. Mike had sandy blonde hair, a strong build, and light blue eyes that showed he worked hard outdoors. If Rhonda hadn't been so angry when they met, she might have flirted, but her father's appearance ruined the moment. Later, the cashier, Frank Myers Tweedledum, called Mike. "That girl you helped with the battery? She asked for your number. Did you give it to her?" Mike asked. "Yeah." Frank laughed. Mike soon realized Bud was right. Rhonda always wanted more. On their second date, Bud showed Mike her closet, packed with shoes, heels, boots, sandals, and 6 pairs of flip-flops. Bud teased her, and Rhonda was annoyed. Mike also learned that Rhonda loved sex. During her first pregnancy, she blossomed. Her once flat figure transformed, and by the time she gave birth to Michelle, she had a fuller figure and was turning heads. But at first, Rhonda resented their daughter, upset that the baby got all the attention. Rhonda later got braces, believing a prettier smile would bring more compliments and gifts. Just as they were removed, she found out she was pregnant again. "Really? Just got into a size 4, and I'm pregnant again?" Rhonda shrieked. "You're getting a vasectomy, Mike?" She ordered. "No one's cutting on Big Mike," he replied, calmly rocking their baby girl. Motherhood did curb some of Rhonda's demands, but as time went on, Mike noticed she became increasingly dissatisfied with their life. Now, sitting at the kitchen table, Mike poured out his third beer, rinsed the can, and tossed it in the recycling bin. He planned to ask Lyle for a good attorney in the morning. He didn't mind paying child support and sharing medical and educational costs, since Rhonda didn't work. But he wondered how she'd cover her share, likely relying on John Piercy. Rhonda was also demanding half his retirement and half the home's value, even though Mike had bought the house before they'd met, and she hadn't contributed to the retirement fund. When Mike asked Lyle Curtis for a good lawyer, Lyle's face turned red as he listened. That snake, that no-good snake? Lyle fumed. Exactly what I called him. Mike replied tightly. Lyle admitted he had seen John Piercy hanging around Rhonda at the picnic and thought she was acting a bit too friendly. He handed Mike a card for Barbara Trennan, the lawyer who had helped him in his own divorce. Barbara, a sharp attorney, reviewed Mike's documents and amended the divorce petition, noting Rhonda's excessive spending and lack of contributions. She warned Mike they would likely go into mediation. And she was right. Rhonda fought the changes, insisting the money and house were hers. Meanwhile, she made it difficult for Mike to see his kids, smugly reminding him he should have signed the original petition. During this time, Lyle Curtis spread the word about John stealing another man's wife, leading local suppliers to cut off credit to Piercy Construction. John's finances suffered as he had to pay cash for materials. And when his bank delayed funding new projects, he became furious. Mike's kids, during their time with him, were distant and talked only about the fun they had with their mom and John. They compared everything Mike offered unfavorably to their time with John, which hurt Mike deeply. John's troubles worsened when he lost a $4 million contract after potential clients questioned his trustworthiness due to his personal life. Seeing Lyle, Harley Rittmuller, and Mike on the news at the groundbreaking ceremony for the project infuriated John. His financial situation spiraled further when his workers left to join Curtis Construction, forcing him to turn down jobs. Even his attorney, Brian White, demanded payment, and Rhonda discovered Mike had canceled her credit cards frustrated. Rhonda turned to her father, Bud, for help, but he begrudgingly loaned her the money and urged her to apologize to Mike, reminding her of her wedding vows. Michael Schiff, the court-appointed mediator, reviewed both Rhonda and Mike's petitions, along with the bank statements and receipts. His expression darkened when he heard a recording of Rhonda smugly telling Mike that if he'd signed the original petition, he'd see the kids more. So, the children are pawns for money? Schiff snapped at Rhonda. It's not like that, her lawyer, Brian White, tried to explain. But Schiff pointed out that Mike had been paying child support and suggested Rhonda get a job. A month after the hollow victory in mediation, Mike called Rhonda, asking to take the kids to Benny's Burger Bar for his 39th birthday. Rhonda relayed the message to the kids, but Michelle whined, "Do I have to?" Mike hung up, heartbroken. Rhonda called back, leaving a message saying both kids already had plans, but they could celebrate another time. Friday came, and Rhonda waited for Mike to call about picking up the kids, but no call came. When she dialed his number, it was no longer in service. Confused, she and John decided to drop the kids off at Mike's house. When they arrived, they saw a for sale sign in the yard, and the house appeared empty. John grew angrier, speeding away in frustration. On the 3rd of the month, Rhonda received the usual $800 check from Mike, but it did little to ease the tension. Mike, sitting alone, broke down in tears after hearing his daughter's disinterest in spending time with him on his birthday. In the days that followed, Mike sold most of the house's contents to a consignment shop. He took sentimental items to the shop himself, but the emotional weight of his kids' rejection had stripped many of those things of their meaning. When Mike told Lyle Curtis he was leaving Raquel Falls in Colorado, Lyle let out a few choice words. The men shared a hug, and some of the crew gave Mike handshakes or hugs as well. "Where are you headed?" a few asked, noticing the trailer hitched to his truck. "Probably south," Mike shrugged, tired of freezing in the winters. "Not like you're using them anyway," one guy joked, and Mike smiled. Barbara Trennan agreed to handle the sale of Mike's house for a reasonable fee. The real estate agent estimated $130,000 to $140,000 for the house. But after Lyle had his crew repaint and recarpet the place, the agent raised the listing to $160,000, which Mike didn't know until she called him. Mike later picked up his divorce decree in Oakleaf, Texas, and celebrated at Tijuana Jack's with a burger, spicy fries, and a couple of beers, even splurging on a lap dance. Finding work wasn't hard. Scanduro Construction contacted Lyle, who vouched that Mike was better than he claimed. The pay was good, but Mike's nights felt empty, living in his trailer at an RV park. He stayed late after work to clean the site, avoiding the loneliness. One afternoon, Gio Tenicetti invited Mike to his house for dinner, insisting after Mike hesitated. Mike eventually agreed, feeling pangs of homesickness as he arrived at Joe's place, which reminded him of Raquel Falls. Joe's wife, Catherine Marie, was French-Canadian and always in close contact with her husband. Their dinner was loud and lively, except for a brief moment of prayer. Mike learned their son Joey played football, and their daughter Cheryl was planning to study biosynthetic engineering. Their eldest, Tony, was studying to be a teacher, something she had wanted since kindergarten. The family's warmth and joy made the meal memorable for Mike. Mike thought about his daughter, Michelle, who had gone through phases, first wanted to be an Olympic skier, then a doctor, and finally a meteorologist. Her interest in being a weather presenter was mostly based on the local station's attractive but clueless weather girl. "You don't even need to know much, just read off a screen," Michelle had said. "Good teachers matter." Mike responded, turning to Tony. "What made you want to be a teacher?" Tony smiled, explaining that her inspiration came from Miss Davis, a smart, pretty teacher who talked about the world beyond Texas. And there ain't no world outside Texas. Gio joked, making everyone laugh. When Tony asked Mike if he had kids, he replied had two, losing his smile. "Lost them?" Joey teased. But Tony quickly smacked him. "Kind of through divorce?" Mike said quietly. After dinner, Mike thanked Catherine Marie for the meal and gave Gio a hug. Admitting it had been a long time since he'd had a family dinner like that, the next day at work, Gio acted like nothing had changed, barking orders and ending the day at 3 o'clock. Mike cleaned up the site, hoping Gio might invite him over again. That Friday, Gio mentioned Catherine Marie was making jambalaya the next night and invited Mike to dinner. Mike eagerly accepted. Later, Gio invited Mike to Joey's football game. Mike cheered from the bleachers, sitting next to Tony, who subtly touched his hand and arm. After the game, Mike felt an odd tension, but focused on the upcoming dinner. On Saturday, Mike brought a strawberry shortcake to the Tanicetti house. Cheryl welcomed him in, and Catherine Marie thanked him for the cake, joking that she didn't need it because of her slight belly, though she couldn't resist being polite. As the family bantered playfully, Tony rolled her eyes at her parents' affection. Mike joked that the second time around, he was no longer a guest, but part of the family, offering to help set the table as everyone laughed and settled in for dinner. Tony showed up just as Mike opened the wrong cabinet. Together, they set the table, with Mike folding napkins while Tony laid down the silverware. "I'll let you get the glasses and ice," Mike said, smiling. "Hey, Mr. Mike," Joey said as he walked in. "We played like crap last night." "Huh?" "You guys played fine," Mike responded. "The other team just came ready to win." As dinner started, Mike discovered Catherine Marie's jambalaya, a delicious mix of chicken, sausage, rice, and vegetables with a spicy kick. Mike fought the urge to overeat, knowing dessert was waiting. When Catherine Marie mentioned the strawberry shortcake Mike brought, Joey cheered. "Good, more for me," he joked. "Son, you've got a lot to learn about women," Mike laughed. Sunday was a long day for Mike, not particularly religious and indifferent to football. He tried sleeping in, but eventually went for a walk, ending up at Oxbow Lake. He noticed a tan blonde woman seeking attention, but being ignored by everyone. "That's how I feel," Mike muttered, watching her deflate as no one noticed her. On Monday, Mike and Carlos finished the trim work. While waiting for the painters and electricians, Mike grabbed a broom to tidy up. "Hey, Morrison," Gio called. "Yeah," Mike responded mid-sweep. "My Tony wants to know if you're coming for dinner tonight," Gio said, his tone sharp. "Sure," Mike said, confused. Joe's face hardened. "She's only 20, Mike. She's half your age." "Whoa, I haven't done anything," Mike protested. Gio glared, but then stormed off to shout at the workers. Later, Mike decided to leave the job to Carlos and his cousin. His work was done. Meanwhile, Barbara Trenton reviewed receipts as Rhonda complained about her expenses. "Can't he chip in a little more?" Rhonda whined. "Divorce is straightforward. Barbara snapped. $400 per child and half of medical and educational expenses. But my car died, and I had to buy a new one. Rhonda protested. Mrs. Morrison, your lack of planning isn't my client's problem, Barbara replied coldly. And where is your client? He missed Michelle's birthday, Rhonda said. We sent a card with a 10 gift card to Benny's Burger Bar, Barbara responded dismissively. Barbara's assistant brought in a check, which Barbara quickly signed and slid across the desk to Rhonda. She packed Rhonda's receipts into the same plastic grocery bag Rhonda had used to bring them. Thank you, Mrs. Piercy. Sorry, Mrs. Morrison, Barbara said, returning to her computer. What about Michelle's braces? Rhonda demanded. Mr. Morrison has paid his half for the braces, soccer camp, and dental visits, Barbara replied without looking up. Can I at least get his contact information? Rhonda asked, her voice growing desperate. No, Barbara responded coldly, still typing. Rhonda lashed out. I hope you have kids one day and deal with someone like you. I have 3. Raised them alone after my husband left. I did fine, Barbara shot back. Now get out. Later, Mike got a call from Gio. Catherine Marie's making chicken cacciatore. You're coming, right? I don't know. Mike began, 6 o'clock. Don't make me beg, Gio insisted. When Mike arrived, Tony's face fell when she saw his travel trailer. You're leaving? She asked, visibly upset. She ran into the house in tears. What's going on? Gio asked as Mike entered. Dinner was tense. Tony's absence was noticed, and when she finally came to the table, her eyes were red from crying. Catherine Marie directly asked Mike why he was leaving, and Gio quickly chimed in, pointing out they had more work lined up. Please stay, Tony whispered, her eyes filled with tears. 5 years later, Rhonda pulled up in front of a red brick house in Texas. Noticing Mike's old travel trailer parked next to the garage on a concrete pad. The well-maintained yard, colorful flowers, and neat decorations weren't Mike's style. Steeling herself, Rhonda rang the doorbell, only to be greeted by a woman's voice through a camera. Does Mike Morrison live here? Rhonda asked, flustered. And you are? The voice responded coldly. This wasn't how Rhonda had imagined things. She had dressed to impress, but standing there, she felt out of place and frustrated. Standing on the doorstep in the Texas heat, Rhonda felt her jeans sticking uncomfortably with sweat. The blouse that once fit attractively now clung awkwardly to her body. I'm Rhonda Morrison, his ex-wife, she said nervously. Does he know you're here? The voice asked. No, Rhonda admitted. After a few moments, the door opened, and there stood Mike, looking even better than before. His blonde hair now had silver streaks, and his muscular frame was bronze from the sun. Yes? Mike asked, his voice hard. Long time no see, Rhonda said with a smirk. What do you want? Mike asked bluntly. Before Rhonda could answer, a beautiful young blonde woman appeared behind Mike, her wet hair and casual wrap suggesting she'd been swimming. Michael, take her to the sunroom, the woman said softly. I don't want her in my house, Mike replied coldly. 5 minutes, the blonde insisted. Mike reluctantly agreed, leading Rhonda to the sunroom. She glanced outside at the pool, where a woman was playing with a young girl and 2 boys. The young blonde joined them, creating a picture-perfect family scene that made Rhonda jealous. 5 minutes talk, Mike ordered. Rhonda cleared her throat. Michelle's getting married next month. She wants you to walk her down the aisle. How far along is she? Mike asked bluntly. Caught off guard, Rhonda admitted. About 4.5 months. Mike responded, his face unreadable. It would mean a lot if you walked her down the aisle. Rhonda continued, trying to soften him. Mike's jaw tightened. God, do I have to? He muttered, echoing Michelle's dismissive words from years ago. What? Rhonda asked, confused. Mike sighed. Last time I tried to spend my birthday with him. That's what I got. God, do I have to? So no, Rhonda, I won't walk her down the aisle. Tell John Piercy to do it. John's not in our lives anymore. Rhonda snapped bitterly. Mike said, uninterested. Before Rhonda could reply, a little girl burst in, wet from the pool. Daddy, did you see me? I jumped off the big board, she exclaimed, running to Mike. Mike's expression softened as he scooped her up. Yeah, I saw, sweetheart. I'm Audrey, I'm 4. The girl proudly told Rhonda. Hello, Audrey, Rhonda managed to say. The young blonde reappeared, apologizing for Audrey's interruption. Mike reassured her, and she took Audrey back to the pool. "So why can't Mickey walk her down the aisle?" Mike asked. Rhonda flinched. "He's in jail," she admitted quietly. Mike's expression didn't change. Wonder if I still have to pay child support if he's in jail." "He's still a minor," Rhonda snapped. "But you don't have him in your custody, do you?" Mike shot back, standing up. 5 minutes is up. "Goodbye, Rhonda." Rhonda, frustrated and on the verge of tears, shouted. "I flew all this way, and you're just going to shut me out. Did I ask you to come here?" Mike replied flatly. "Maybe Michelle should have come herself." With that, Mike opened the door and called out to his daughter. "You all waterlogged yet?" My fingers are all bumpy," Audrey called back, making Mike smile as he turned away from Rhonda. Rhonda glared at Mike. "You've done well for yourself," she said bitterly, glancing around the house and the backyard scene. "No thanks to you," Mike replied sarcastically, guiding her to the door. They walked in silence, and once outside, Mike shut the door behind her. Rhonda trudged to her car in the sweltering Texas heat, her clothes sticking uncomfortably. Inside, Mike headed to the kitchen where his wife and their maid were trying to figure out dinner for the kids. "Boogers and toes," Mike joked, making his wife, Precious, laugh. "Hot dogs!" Russell, one of the twins, shouted, quickly echoed by his brother Bertrand. Mike suggested spaghetti with hot dogs, and the kids cheered in agreement. After dinner and baths, Mike and Precious finally got the kids to bed. "So, what did your ex want?" Precious asked, kissing Mike on the cheek. "She wanted me to walk Michelle down the aisle." "She's getting married next month," Mike said seriously. "Are we going to Raquel Falls?" Precious asked, excited. "No," Mike said calmly. "We're not going." Precious sat up surprised. "You're not going to walk your daughter?" "No, I'm not," Mike replied firmly. Precious sighed, clearly frustrated. "I know it hurt," but she began resting her head on his chest. Mike kissed her, but her worry was obvious. He thought about their first meeting at Oxbow Lake nearly 7 years ago and how much he loved her. Before Precious, Mike had dated Tony. She was smart, fun, and the chemistry was good, but there was no deeper connection. It had been Tony who brought up the truth while they walked around Oxbow Lake one day. "Michael, I love you, but I'm not in love with you," Tony had said, and Mike admitted he felt the same. They cared for each other, but there was no long-term future. They parted as friends, grateful they hadn't forced something that wasn't there. As they walked, they saw a woman with a small dog on a retractable leash. The dog darted toward a jogger, who didn't notice the leash and got tangled, crashing to the ground with the dog trapped underneath. The moment was comically absurd, but it solidified Mike's realization that life was unpredictable, and sometimes things just didn't work out as planned. The woman started screaming at the jogger, but Mike quickly stepped in, helping the injured jogger and grabbing the snarling dog. He unhooked the leash and handed the dog to its owner. "Hold your dog and ditch the leash," Mike ordered. The jogger was clearly injured, with a swelling forehead and a broken ankle. "Concussion and broken leg," Mike said. "Tony, get her name and address." The dog owner protested, but Mike took her picture and called emergency. The operator said an ambulance would take 40 minutes, so Mike decided to drive the jogger to the hospital himself. Tony followed, getting eyes for the woman's head, and Mike drove quickly, hazard lights on. At the hospital, they were met by a nurse and orderly who took over. After explaining what happened, Mike drove Tony home. They hugged, and Tony went inside, leaving Mike to decide whether to return to the hospital or go home. With work the next day, he chose to head home. That night, after Tony begged him to stay, Mike decided he needed something more permanent than his trailer. While waiting for Scanduro Construction's next project, Mike bought a foreclosed home, which was in terrible shape. He cleaned it up using his construction connections for affordable materials. As Mike worked, he bought more foreclosed properties, selling 3 and deciding to live in the 4th on Roberts Drive. His next project was a house where the previous owner had hanged himself after losing everything. The man's wife, Nora, had emptied the safe deposit boxes and disappeared after his pass away, leaving the house to be seized by the bank. Mike bought it at a fraction of its value, needing only to replace garish carpets and repaint the loud walls. After work one day, Mike decided to visit the jogger at the hospital. Unsure of her name, he checked with a nurse who directed him to her room. The first thing she said was, "They cut up my shoe. Couldn't anyone just untie it?" Mike smiled. I asked the same thing. He explained how the dog had tangled her up, causing her fall. As they chatted, Mike couldn't shake the feeling he'd seen the blonde woman before and mentioned it. She thought for a moment before shaking her head. "I was at Connolly," she offered. "Oh yeah? What were you studying?" he asked. "Education. I want to be a teacher," she replied. She smiled. "Maybe that's where I know you from." "I picked up Tony there a few times," Mike said, then added, "By the way, what's your name?" "Precious Cruz," she replied. "I know, I don't look Mexican." "So precious. Anyone you need to call?" Mike asked. Her expression darkened. "No," she stammered. "My mom died last year, and my dad disowned me." Mike glanced at his watch and said he'd be back later. Precious smiled sadly as he left. It was then Mike remembered where he had seen her before. "Oxbow Lake," he said, as Precious adjusted her gown, blushing. "No, you were sunbathing," Mike explained. "Beautiful girl in a green bikini, looking as sad as I was." "What were you sad about?" Precious asked. Mike sat down again and told her about his 2 kids. He had wanted to name his son Russell or Bertrand after family members. But his wife Rhonda chose Mike Jr. Mickey. "That's a good name," Precious said with a smile. She then asked about his daughter, Audrey, after my mom. But Rhonda decided on Michelle. Mike replied. "Do you see them often?" She asked. "It's been a few months. They got a pool and a boogie board. What do they need with their dad?" Mike said. He stayed until dinner arrived, surprising both of them with a gentle kiss before leaving. The next day, while working on a wall at the bank, Mike's phone rang. It was Precious. "They're discharging me today," she said. Mike promised to come as soon as possible. After explaining to Gio, he rushed to the hospital, picked up Precious, and helped her into his truck. "Where am I taking you?" Mike asked. "Home," she replied, giving directions to Spanish Arms Apartments. On the way, she remembered her car was still at Kennedy Park. Mike laughed at her tiny Volkswagen Beetle, but helped her out of his truck. "It's cute," Precious defended, laughing as Mike teased her. Mike noticed the plaster boot on Precious's leg and realized driving her car would be difficult. "I'll drop you off and bring your car over," Mike offered. "That's too much," Precious protested. "You can't drive like that, and we can't leave it," Mike insisted. When they arrived at her apartment, Mike saw another issue. She lived on the 3rd floor. "They didn't give you crutches?" Mike asked. "No," Precious realized, her eyes welling with tears. "Okay, get your key. I'll carry you up," Mike said, lifting her to her apartment. After settling her inside, he went out to buy some boxes. "What are those for?" Precious asked when Mike returned. "Pack what you need for the next couple of weeks. You're staying with me until you can get around," Mike instructed. She was about to argue, but realized how hard even moving around her apartment was. "I assume your place is on the ground floor?" she asked. "Your bedroom will be," Mike assured her. After helping her pack, Mike got a hitch, towed her car to his house, and carried her to the truck. At the house, Mike said, Precious looked around the affluent neighborhood. "I've been here at Christmas time. These houses go all out with lights," she said. Mike smiled. "Like Clark Griswold?" "Who?" Precious asked, confused. When they arrived, she commented on the house. "You need something in all those windows for Christmas lights," she said, craning her neck. Mike carried her inside. "When I carry you across the threshold for real, I expect you in a nice dress," he teased. "What's wrong with fiberglass?" Precious joked, waggling her cast. Mike set her on the couch. "Love this couch," she said. "Is this where I'm staying?" "No, I'll carry you to the bedroom after I get your things," Mike replied with a smile. Mike quickly carried Precious's boxes into the house, then scooped her off the couch and brought her to the bedroom. "Yep, you're definitely a man," Precious joked, glancing at the simple furniture. Mike chuckled as he laid her on the bed, but she held on to him and kissed him softly. "Thank you, Michael," she whispered. "You're welcome," Mike smiled. "Need the bathroom?" he asked. "Right across the hall. Mind reader," she teased. Mike carried her to the bathroom, setting her down before stepping out and shutting the door. "Just shout when you're done," he called. While she was occupied, Mike found extra pillows and set up an old TV for her. He made her some soup and later picked up crutches from a rental store. This marked the beginning of 5 weeks living together. At first, Precious complained about early mornings. But by the third day, she was awake and waiting for him to carry her to the kitchen. On the fourth morning, when he asked about using crutches, she whispered, "You, but I like when you carry me." Mike smiled and admitted he liked it too. However, Mike's time off for Precious's doctor visits and therapy sessions frustrated Joe, his boss. Joe's complaints escalated, and when Mike took more time off, Joe berated him in front of the crew. Mike simply nodded and left the job site without a word. When he returned home early, Precious noticed. "Oh, no appointment today, right?" she asked. "No. Got run off the job," Mike replied. He explained how his frequent absences, combined with old tensions from dating Joe's daughter, Tony, had led to the confrontation. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I could have asked a friend for help," Precious said. "I wanted to take you," Mike confessed. "Why?" she asked, looking deeply into his eyes. "Because I'm in love with you." "And I'm in love with you, Michael Arthur Morrison," Precious whispered before kissing him softly. Now that Mike was unemployed, he invested in more foreclosed homes, renovated them, and continued to profit. Being his own boss gave him the flexibility to take Precious to her doctor's appointments, physical therapy, and fun outings. On one such outing to the Hogshead, a barbecue place Precious loved, Mike had an unexpected encounter. "Hey, Prez," a muscular man sneered. "Hi, Barry," Precious responded flatly. "So, this your dad?" Barry mocked, trying to sit next to her. Precious stopped him. "No, this is my Michael Morrison." "Barry, I used to date him," she said. Barry laughed sarcastically. "You're what?" "Yeah, there's a big difference between men and boys," Precious replied sweetly before dismissing him. "Your fiancé?" Mike asked as their food arrived. "Oh, you didn't know?" Precious teased, offering him a finger dipped in sauce. "Want to get married the day after Christmas? Gives me a month to find the perfect ring." Mike smiled. Precious grinned, happy, and added, "Gives me time to get this cast off." "Time for me to learn some dance moves," Mike joked. They married in Sweet Oak, Texas, with Brandon Wright from the Fellowship performing the ceremony. The lively reception had guests dancing to a DJ and enjoying barbecue from the Hogshead. Mike had learned the Texas two-step and swing much to Precious's delight. Tony Tonasetti congratulated them, but later locked herself in the bathroom crying. Brandon's son, Emmanuel, offered her a handkerchief when she emerged. "Seeing others happy can be tough sometimes," he said gently. Tony smiled slightly. "Yeah, I know." Emmanuel encouraged her to join the fun. "What are you waiting for?" "Let's dance," he said, taking her hand and leading her to the floor. 9 months and 2 days after their wedding, Mike found himself back at Lowridge Hospital, this time for the birth of Bertrand Michael and Russell Morrison. Precious endured the 5-hour labor with screams, sobs, and declarations of love for Mike, her knight in shining armor. 17 months later, Precious gave birth to their daughter, Audrey. On the same day, Tony Wright, now married to Emmanuel, was delivering their first child just 2 doors down. Fast forward to the present, and the Morrisons were traveling to Colorado to reconnect with Mike's children. As they stepped off the plane in Benny's, Colorado, Mike grumbled. "Can't believe it," he muttered, while Curtis, Mike's old boss, greeted him with a laugh and a hug. "New Texas finally got tired of you, huh?" Surprised, Mike hugged him back. "Lal, what are you doing here?" After catching up, Mike introduced his family. Lal joked with Precious, met the twins, and Audrey proudly introduced herself as 4 and not scared of anything. Lal insisted they stay at his house instead of the Hilton, where his daughter worked. Once settled, Mike took a deep breath and called his daughter Michelle. The voice that answered was cold and unfamiliar. "Hey, it's your dad," Mike said nervously. Michelle responded, sharp and skeptical. Mike invited her to Benny's Burger Bar, trying to sound casual, but her reply was dripping with sarcasm. After ending the call, Mike sighed heavily. "Benny's at 6, he told Precious, frustration in his voice. She sounded just as bratty as she did at 13. Precious, ever calm, reminded him not to expect the worst, sharing how her second graders sometimes surprised her when she let go of expectations. "I don't know why I let you talk me into this," Mike grumbled, though a smile crept in as Bertrand won his video game. Precious moved closer, whispering about a special night, easing Mike's frustration. When he wrapped his arm around her, she giggled, teasing, "But not here." At exactly 6 o'clock, Mike led Audrey and Russell into the restaurant, with Precious and Bertrand following. Bertrand was distracted by a sleek Porsche 911 outside and wanted a closer look. Inside, Mike scanned the crowd, disappointment turning to anger when he didn't see Michelle. "She here?" Precious whispered, gently squeezing his hand. Mike replied bluntly, "Maybe she's stuck in traffic?" Precious suggested, trying to stay hopeful. "Did you see any traffic out there?" Mike snapped. "Raquel Falls doesn't have traffic jams. How do we do this?" Precious asked as they approached the counter. "You choose a burger. Quarter pound, half pound, or 1 pound." Mike explained, trying to lighten the mood. "A 1-pound burger?" Audrey asked wide-eyed. "Daddy's teasing. It's a big burger, but not that big." Precious giggled. Then Mike explained the toppings bar with over 40 options. Bertrand mischievously asked if boogers were one of them, earning a reprimand from Precious. But Mike played along, making the kids laugh. Michelle arrived nearly 20 minutes late, barely acknowledging Mike, dragging out her order and slamming her tray on the table. "So you're about 5 months along?" Mike asked, gesturing to her belly. "Uh-huh," Michelle grunted, shoveling food into her mouth. "I'm 2 months along," Precious offered, trying to connect. "That's nice," Michelle muttered. "So, Dad, you wanted this meeting? Let's get it over with," Michelle said, not looking up from her food. Mike kept his temper in check. "Your mom says you're getting married this Saturday." "Yeah, and I heard you said, who cares?" Michelle shot back with a smirk. "I'm here to see you get married. Introduce you to your siblings," Mike said calmly. "Uh-huh, fine," Michelle said dismissively. "I'm Precious," Precious said kindly, reaching out. "I'm sure you are," Michelle sneered. "That's her name," Mike said through clenched teeth. "This is Audrey, and these are Bertrand and Russell. Guys, this is your big sister, Michelle." "Hi," Bertrand and Russell said shyly, while Audrey proudly announced, "I'm 4, Michelle's eyes narrowed. "Oh, so you think you could just come back into my life, and I'll be all, 'Hi, Dad. Great to see you. Don't worry about the times you weren't there." She said sarcastically, "No, I thought maybe you'd be mature enough to say, 'Sorry I acted like a spoiled brat and treated my dad like a burden when he worked hard for me.' But I guess we're both disappointed." Mike shot back, barely holding his temper. "Daddy said a bad word," Audrey whispered to Precious. "I know, and I heard you say it too," Precious replied, pinching Audrey's nose playfully. "I was just telling on Daddy." Audrey protested. "Well, don't," Precious warned gently. Michelle shoved her tray, spilling her drink. "Don't come to my wedding. I don't want you there." "No problem," Mike said, catching the tray before the soda spilled on the kids. "We'll drop your gift at your mother's house," Precious added calmly as Michelle stormed out. "Whatever," which Michelle sneered as she left. "She said," Audrey began. "And if you say it, you'll get a spanking right here," Precious cut her off. Mike sighed and tried to change the subject. "So, how was Benny's Burger Bar?" "Next time, I'm getting more pickles," Bertrand said excitedly. "And barbecue sauce," Russell added with a grin. Mike smiled, relieved their spirits weren't dampened. Later, after dropping Precious and the kids off for ice cream, he headed to the address his lawyer had given him. The apartment complex was run down, far from the neighborhood Michelle had grown up in. As Mike got out, a teenager approached. "Yo, can't park there. That's my boy's spot. Sign says visitors," Mike replied, irritated. "Pull your pants up." The teen's eyes widened, but he persisted. "Let me hold 5, though." "Ain't happening," and "pull your damn pants up." "You look ridiculous," Mike snapped, walking past him. At Rhonda's door, he knocked, and the door rattled. "Who's there?" came her harsh voice. "It's Mike, dropping off Michelle's wedding present." Rhonda opened the door, sneering. "Heard it went well," she mocked. Mike ignored her, handed over the package, and asked, "Where's Barbie, your Texas wife?" Rhonda sneered. "Go screw yourself," Mike spat, turning to leave. Rhonda laughed. "Jealous I traded up, huh?" she taunted. But Mike was already walking away. Back at the van, the teen was still there. "Kept an eye on your wheels. About $1, huh?" "Kid, pull your pants up," Mike growled, slamming the door. As he revved the engine, the teen stumbled back and fell, his sagging pants tripping him. Mike chuckled as he drove off, texting Precious, "On my way." When Mike arrived at Scooter's, Precious greeted him with a smile and a double-dipped chocolate ice cream cone. "Daddy got you a double chocolate," she teased. Scooter's got you a big, sloppy kiss." Mike joked, leaning in to give her a loud, exaggerated kiss that made the kids giggle. "Michael, stop." Precious laughed, playfully swatting him while the kids kept laughing. The next morning, Mike met his son Mickey in a small, dim room. Mickey, now 17, sat sullenly, staring at the floor. After a long silence, Mickey sneered. "Thanks for the cheap Benny's gift cards." "You're welcome," Mike replied, trying to stay light. $10 doesn't cover anything there." Mickey snapped, his voice rising in anger. "So you'd have to pay a little yourself," Mike said, meeting his gaze calmly. "Why do you even come here?" Mickey demanded. "What do you want?" "I came to see if any of the kid I went fishing with was still there," Mike admitted quietly. "Saw your sister. Nothing left. I was hoping for a bit of that kid who caught a 6-pound rainbow trout." Mickey's expression softened for a moment. 6.5 pounds, he muttered. "Yep, and your mom said she wasn't cleaning it," Mike chuckled, recalling the memory. Mickey's tone lightened. "How we get all those fillets again?" "Bought 3 more fish at Niedermeyer's," Mike laughed. "Dad!" Mickey's voice cracked as the deputy came to escort Mike out. "Dad!" Mickey called out, but the door closed, leaving his words hanging in the air. Mike walked out, knowing he had tried, but unsure if his kids would ever be ready to reconnect. Despite his efforts, things didn't fully mend. Mike even hired Barbara Trennan to help with Mickey's legal trouble. But Mickey was sentenced to 2 years in a state penitentiary. Barbara got him into a medium-security facility, but it weighed heavily on Mike. Months later, Mike learned he was a grandfather. Michelle had given birth to a premature baby girl, Louise Charlotte Trennan, weighing just 3 pounds. Tragically, the baby didn't survive beyond a week. Mike wrote a heartfelt letter to Michelle and her estranged husband, but never knew if they read it. 7 months later, Precious gave birth to Olivia Nicole Morrison, a bright light in their lives. Though Mike was still haunted by the granddaughter he never held. 3 weeks after Olivia's birth, tragedy struck again. Precious was waiting for Audrey at the bus stop when a speeding truck lost control, struck Precious, and crashed into a nearby house. Audrey witnessed the entire accident, standing in shock as her world shattered. 3 hours later, Precious was placed on life support at the hospital. Mike wasn't crying. He was numb, still trying to process the call that had shattered his world. He drove to the hospital, but it felt like he wasn't in control, as if he were just sitting silently, watching everything move around him. He held Audrey in his arms, but he couldn't feel her touch. He saw her crying, but the words to comfort her wouldn't come. The silence was broken when the doctor came out with a grim expression. "Mr. Morrison, I did my best. She's in a better place now." Mike stood there feeling the weight of the words, but unable to respond. He was frozen in a daze, standing in the hospital hallway for what felt like forever. Audrey gently shook his hand, her small voice asking, "Can we see Mom?" He knew it was time for the hardest conversation of his life. Mike knelt down to Audrey's level, his voice soft but steady. "We might not see Mommy again. God asked her to stay with him in heaven. She's gone to sleep, a deep sleep, and she may not wake up for a long, long time." He wasn't sure if Audrey fully understood, but she said, "Okay, let her sleep. We should go home. The baby's been waiting for Mommy a long time." Mike didn't know if Audrey was pretending or if she had suddenly grown up, but soon he would know the answer. 3 days later, Audrey woke up. Precious was laid to rest in her wedding dress. Mike stood beside her casket, his hand resting on her still chest. For the first time, he touched her and didn't feel her heart beating. Then his tears came unstoppable, as he realized he had never truly told her how much she meant to him, how much he loved her. He looked up at the cross, silently praying, "Just one moment, please. Give her life for one moment so I can tell her, so I can feel her heartbeat one last time." Everyone gave their eulogies, but Audrey broke every heart in the room. She walked up to the podium with a piece of paper in her hand, her small voice echoing through the hall. "My name is Audrey. I'm 4 years old. My daddy's in the bathroom because he doesn't like people to see him cry. My mom is the most beautiful and strongest woman. My daddy said God wants her to stay at his house for a while. I don't know when she'll be back, but I know she'll like her stay. She's in heaven. If my mom is watching me from heaven, I want her to know that I love her and will miss her. My mom's name is Precious. and she's very precious to me and my daddy. My baby sister can't talk yet, but I know she misses mommy too. So God, please send her back soon. Thank you, everyone. Please don't cry. My mommy is with God." Her words left no dry eyes. Mike couldn't hold back anymore. He ran out of the bathroom and hugged Audrey tightly, releasing all the tears he had been holding in. And Audrey whispered, "I'm here for you, Daddy." The house felt emptier than ever when they returned. Mike's mind stayed on every moment they had shared, every kiss, every laugh, but now it was just memories. The love of his life was gone forever. 2 years later, Mickey was released from prison, but quickly slipped back into his old ways. High on powder and with a promiscuous in his car, Mickey caused a huge wreck on the highway. Both he and the woman died instantly. At Mickey's funeral, Mike didn't give a eulogy or speak to anyone. Rhonda was there, crying, but Mike never approached her. After everyone left, Mike placed a single white flower on Mickey's grave. Rhonda came up behind him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mike. If only I'd kept the family together. My wanting more in life cost me my husband, my family, and now my son. I never realized my choices would damage not just my marriage, but my family." Mike said nothing. He just turned and walked away. That was the last time he saw Rhonda alive. 10 years later, he saw her again at her funeral. At that funeral, Michelle handed him a letter. "Mom wanted you to have this," she said softly. Mike kept the letter in his pocket and didn't read it until later that night at home. The letter had only 3 words. "I am sorry." In her final days, Rhonda had only one wish: to be forgiven. Mike folded the letter and put it in his drawer, thinking about all the lost time and missed chances. That night, he went out to the porch and stared at the starry sky. Lost in thought, he didn't notice Audrey behind him until she spoke. "I saw the letter," she said softly. Mike looked over his shoulder. "Didn't I teach you not to read private letters?" "Well, I forgot," she replied with a small smile. "But all she wanted was your forgiveness. She's gone now, so your hate won't hurt her." "You're starting to sound like your mother," Mike said, shaking his head. "I can't help it. Must be in the genes," Audrey replied, her smile fading. "Did you forgive her?" "I did," Mike said quietly. "I forgave her when I married your mom. I just never told her. Now I can't." "You don't need to tell her, just tell yourself," Audrey said gently. That night, Mike slept well for the first time in years. He thought about how Audrey, now only 14, could speak like an adult. 23 years later, Mike was sleeping again, but this time forever. Audrey stood once again at the podium, just as she had at her mother's funeral so many years ago. "My name is Audrey," she began, her voice calm but emotional. "The last time I was up here I was 4, and it was for my mom's funeral. That day, my dad told me my mom was with God, and that one day she'd meet me again. He didn't tell me the wait would be a lifetime. Today my dad beat me to it. He's finally with the one he loved." Audrey's voice cracked, but she continued. "When my mom died, everyone thought my dad would fall apart. They thought he'd become a heavy drinker and ruin his life. But he loved her more than anyone realized. He didn't grieve her the way people expected. He lived every day to show his love for her. He never remarried, never dated. For him, we were his life. He was both my father and my mother. He taught me everything: how to tell birds from bees, how to fish, how to cook, and how to be a good person. He made sure we were all educated and had good lives." Audrey paused, tears filling her eyes. "There aren't enough words to describe his kindness, his love. In my final words, I hope he finds his precious in heaven. And Daddy, if you're watching, I want you to know we love you." Mike was laid to rest beside Precious that day. All his children stood together near the graves of 2 people who had loved each other deeply, now together forever. Their long story of loss and love had finally come to an end.